The more he thought it over, the less Sullivan liked it, or the better. I suppose it depends on the point of view. But he had no intention of arresting George Talbot at that time. He had taken a uniformed man with him, and they found George, grumpy after an almost sleepless night, in the stable and ready to get out of his ancient car. Rather apologetically, they asked if they might see his gun. "What for?" he demanded. "Am I under suspicion now? You seem to have tried everyone else." "Not at all, but you understand that there is a routine to all this. We're checking all the guns in the vicinity." That seemed to satisfy him, for he produced it at once from the pocket of the car. He was not particularly gracious about it, however. "It's such damned nonsense," he complained. "I sit up all night and lose my sleep to protect the Lancaster house with that gun, and now I'm a suspect myself." "I've got a permit, by the way. Do you want that?" He seemed astounded when they did, but he produced it and they checked the number on it, which was correct. Certainly it was his own gun. "I've cleaned it recently," he said. "Yesterday evening, as a matter of fact. I knew I was taking it with me last night." "And when did you fire it last?" Sullivan asked him. But he could not remember. In the spring, he thought, or early summer, at a picnic. They had been shooting at empty bottles. He was rather affronted than alarmed apparently when they took it away with them. After all, he had been up most of the night and was generally disgruntled anyhow. But in less than an hour he was at police headquarters. Examination had showed that bullets fired from his gun corresponded exactly under the microscope with the one which had killed Miss Emily. Confronted with this fact, even shown the pictures, greatly enlarged, he either maintained a stubborn silence or reiterated his earlier story. He had slept with the gun under his pillow ever since Mrs. Lancaster was killed. He had put on the safety catch and crawled out the window with it in his hand. He had not fired it at all, had had no reason to fire it. What was more, no one else had fired it. It had never left his possession. Since the Thursday before he had slept on it at night and carried it with him by day. On the night before, knowing he was to spend the night as he had taken it entirely apart, had taken out the barrel and the spring, had oiled and rubbed it and then reloaded it. "Why would I keep it, if I'd killed poor old Emily?" he demanded. "Don't you suppose I know that every gun puts its mark on a bullet?" I'm not a fool. Then you ought to know that these marks are identical. They showed him the enlargements of photographs, but he only shook his head. That's your business, he said. Mine's to get out of here with a whole skin. But don't fool yourselves that anybody else has had that gun of mine. If you think that you don't know our house, we're not only locked up against the world, we're locked up against each other. That was the best they could do. They held him all day and well into the night, and then they had to let him go home. They let him go because there were some things they could not understand about the automatic, especially about that empty shell of Amanda's. I am no expert in ballistics, but I believe it had to do with a firing pin. There was some microscopic deviation there, but small as it was, it released George. He was not free, of course. Thereafter, and until our third mystery was solved, I was more than once to meet George walking briskly along with a detective following at a discreet distance, and to have George say, "Just taking him around the block before I turn in. I've offered to put him on a leash, but he doesn't fancy the idea." It must have been about the time in our reign of terror that the Commissioner of Police sent for Inspector Briggs and asked him ironically if he would like to take over the public library on Liberty Avenue as headquarters for the men on the case. It was after luncheon on that same Tuesday that Mrs. Talbot and Lydia heard the news of George's arrest, and they reacted in characteristic fashion. Mrs. Talbot at once called a taxi and fairly took police headquarters by assault. "Where is my son?" she boomed.